Hello, welcome to We Draw More. My name's Phil, and this is the third in the series where I'm looking at the top ranked decks on EDHREC, looking at the commander, looking at why it's top ranked, and then trying to pick something less played as an alternative. We're up to the number three. Number three in the top ranked cards is Atraxa, Praetors Voice. Atraxa is green, white, blue, black on a 4/4 body with flying, vigilance, death, touch, and lifelink. And they have, at the beginning of your end step, proliferate. So they are a reasonable sized body. They have lots of keywords: flying, vigilance, death, touch, and lifelink. So they don't tap to attack. They fly. They have death, touch, and lifelink, so you're unlikely to be blocked. You are going to gain life. You could, if you really wanted to, play some kind of Voltron build around Atraxa, but I suspect that everyone that's playing Atraxa is playing her because she has proliferate. Proliferate is choose any number of permanents and or players, then give each another counter of each kind already there. This means that Atraxa is great in several different deck synergy types. The first synergy type that springs to mind is to use Planeswalkers in a kind of a Super Friends build. We could play Atraxa alongside cards such as Teferi, Master of Time. Teferi is 2 colors, 2 blue, legendary Planeswalker Teferi. You may activate loyalty abilities of Teferi, Master of Time on any player's turn anytime you could cast an instant. You're a +1, draw a card and discard a card. -3, target creature you don't control phases out. And -10, take 2 extra turns after this one. The idea, therefore, would be that you proliferate with Atraxa, adding extra loyalty counters to Teferi, and get to that -10 where you've got that sweet ability to take 2 extra turns after this one. You can then also play different types of support cards with Teferi. I chose Oath of Teferi just because, one, I have 2 Teferis on screen at one time. When Oath of Teferi enters the battlefield, exile another target permanent you control, return to the battlefield under its owner's control step at the beginning of the next end step. You may activate the loyalty abilities of Planeswalkers you control twice each turn rather than only once. So we get to activate our positives or our negatives. We get to proliferate, which is increase our number of loyalty counters, which makes our Planeswalkers that much more powerful. However, if I was going to play a Planeswalker deck, I would be tempted to play something like Sisay. Sisay, Weatherlight Captain, is 2 colorless, 1 white, and is a legendary creature human soldier that has Sisay, Weatherlight Captain gets +1/+1 for each color among other legendary permanents you control. Note that Planeswalkers are legendary permanents. And then we have white, blue, black, red, green. Search your library for a legendary permanent card with converted mana cost less than Sisay's power. Put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So what Sisay enables you to do is to rummage through your library and search out all the best cards that you want to get. So all those Planeswalkers that you want to get into play to answer different threats, you can get them out into play. And that ability to tutor for Planeswalkers and other legendary creatures and other legendary cards as well, I think is very strong, and I think I would be tempted to go that way. Another 5-color commander you could pick instead of Sisay would be Atraxa, God of the Tree. Atraxa, God of the Tree is 1 colorless, 2 green. There are 1/4 legendary creature god with vigilance. Tap, add 1 mana of any color. Other legendary creatures you control have vigilance, and tap, add 1 mana of any color. That's the front side of the card. What we really want to do is to play with the back side of the card. And the back side of the card, if you're not familiar, is the Prismatic Bridge. The Prismatic Bridge is white, blue, black, red, and green. It's a legendary enchantment and says at the beginning of your upkeep, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature or planeswalker card. Put that card onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. The Prismatic Bridge is less searching like a tutor and more just cheating cards into play. And over the long run, this will give you a significant card advantage. The next synergy I can think of that I would use Atraxa with is +1/+1 counter decks. So in +1/+1 counter decks, the idea is to put +1/+1 counters on lots of small creatures or a few number of big creatures or a combination thereof. So they all get a lot bigger, and then you overrun your opponents quite literally with your much bigger creatures, do them lots of damage, and you win the game that way. When you proliferate, you can increase the number of +1/+1 counters on each creature that already has a +1/+1 counter it by 1. This makes me think of a Renegade Krasis. Renovate Crisis is a 1 colorless 2 green creature. It's a beast mutant with a 3/2 body that has evolve. Evolve is whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control. If that creature has power or toughness greater than this creature, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. And then whenever Renegade Crisis evolves, put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. Similar to how Proliferate works, but not the same. If we were then to combine these effects with cards like Hardened Scales is a 1 green enchantment that has if one or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a creature you control, that many +1/+1/+1 counters are put on it instead. So if you put 1 on, you put 2. If you put 2 on, you put 3. So you're getting extra value from the +1/+1 counters. Therefore, at the beginning of your end step, if you proliferate and you've got 1 +1/+1 counter on a creature, you will add 2 extra +1/+1 counters to that creature. So you can see the value that proliferating with +1/+1 counters would generate. If I were to keep within the colors of Atraxa, but build a +1/+1 counter deck, and I didn't want to use Atraxa, I may be tempted to use a card like Galadriel, Light of Valinor. Galadriel is 2 colorless, green, white, blue, so we're losing the black. But in +1/+1 counter decks, I don't think that's so bad. They are a legendary creature elf noble. They have a 3/3 body. They have Alliance. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn. You can add 3 green mana, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, or you can scry 2 and then draw a card. Galadriel offers huge amounts of value. I think a lot more value actually than Atraxa does. Atraxa offers flexibility. Galadriel just offers sheer value. You lay a creature, you add 3 green. You use that to play another creature, you scry 2, and then you draw a card. If you've got an free mana, you can play another creature, and then you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. And you can repeat that every turn because it's one that hasn't been chosen this turn. So if you've got ways of generating tokens, for example, during your opponent's turns, then you can draw cards during your opponent's turns, or you can add +1/+1 counters to all your creatures during your opponent's turns, or you can add extra mana during your opponent's turns. And I'm assuming the idea here is that you would put Galadriel in something like an elf deck, or maybe a mermaid deck, or just a generic token generation good stuff type deck. Stray slightly outside of Atraxa's colours and include red, then I would play Shalai and Halal. Shalai and Halal is a little bit simpler. They are 1 colourless red, green, white, so Naya. They are a legendary creature angel elf. They have a 3/3 body with flying and vigilance, and they have whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on a creature you control, Shalai and Halal deal that much damage to target opponent. So the idea with Shalai and Halar is that not only are you boosting all your creatures, but you're actually dealing a lot of damage when you're doing so. If you want to, you can just sit back. You don't necessarily have to attack. The other bonus of Shalai and Halar is because you're getting the damage out of the +1/+1 counters when you put them on the creatures, should someone board wipe, you've already got value from the counters. The third type of synergy, and my least favourite type of synergy in all of Magic the Gathering, is poison counters or infect. Toxic as well if you want for newer players, but I'm an older player, so I remember when we first got cards like Skithiryx, the Blight Dragon. Skithiryx is a 3 colorless, 2 black dragon skeleton. They're 4/4, they have flying and infect. And infect says this creature deals damage to creatures in the form of -1/-1 counters and to players in the form of poison counters. If you're relatively new to Magic and Commander, the rules in both Standard and Commander, in fact, are that if you receive 10 poison counters, you lose the game. Skithiryx also has 1 black. Skithiryx the Black Dragon gains haste until end of turn, so you can get it to attack until it comes into play if you need to. And 2 black regenerates Skithiryx, so if someone tries to destroy it, you can regenerate it, but if someone exiles it, then it's still leaving the game no matter what. Containment Grafter. So it's 4 colorless, 1 green. Creature Phyrexian Druid, Trample Toxic 1. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to 1 or more players, proliferate. Corrupted. At the beginning of your end step, if an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, draw a card, then you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. So Containment Grafter is doing an awful lot of work. It's a much more modern card. More modern cards do tend to do more work. They have trample, so they can get that damage through to give the opponent poison counters. If you're proliferating, you are increasing the number of poison counters on players because proliferate does specifically say and or players. And if they have 3 or more poison counters, then at the beginning of your end step, you get to draw a card, and then you could also put a land from your hand onto the battlefield. So it's helping you to ramp, it's helping you to draw cards, and it's getting to that goal of 10 poison counters on your opponents. If I was going to play something other than Atraxa, but I wanted to play poison counters, I might consider Ixal, Scion of Atraxa. They're 1 colorless, white, black, green. They are a legendary creature, Phyrexian Angel. They have flying, vigilance, and toxic 2, so they can get poison counters onto your opponents because they have a nice little bit of evasion there, and they don't tap to attack. They have corrupted. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent who has 3 or more poison counters exiles the top card of their library face down. You may look at and play those cards for as long as they remain exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any colour to cast those spells. There's an interesting little wording there. It says you may look at and play those cards. So if they're land cards, you can play them. I think it still requires you to play them as in your land for turn, but you can effectively steal your opponent's lands that way. And then it says cast, so you can also cast them if they are spells. So what Ixal is doing, Ixal is trying to get value out of giving your opponents poison counters by basically stealing their spells. And if you don't steal them, they've still been exiled, which means that they are still out of your opponent's reach. Another legendary creature I would be willing to consider is Vizgraj the Doom Hive. They are 2 colorless, white, black, green. They are a legendary creature, Phyrexian Insect. They have Menace, Toxic 1. Players dealt combat damage by this creature also get poison counter. And they have, when Fishgrave, the Doom Hive, enters the battlefield, create 3 1/1 colorless Phyrexian artifact creature tokens with Toxic 1, and this creature can't block. Vizgrav gets +1/+1 for each poison counter your opponents have. Vizgrav is a toolbox to go wide. You have lots of little creatures that are able to give poison counters to your opponents by sheer weight, I suppose, of might. You can do all sorts of things with 1/1 artifact creature tokens. Those are 3 different synergies that you can use Atraxa for. But I think if I'm going to consider replacing Atraxa with another commander, I'm going to consider just using Proliferate and look for a commander that will proliferate for me so that I can add all sorts of different counters to all sorts of different cards in my deck. Now, I know that's not necessarily the optimum strategy. I know that means I'm not going to be building a bracket 3 or bracket 4 deck. I'm probably just building a bracket 2. But let's have a look at the way my thought pattern went anyway. So if we're going to proliferate, there's cards we can choose, such as Vraska, Betrayal's Sting. Vraska is 4 colorless black, and that's Phyrexian black mana. Phyrexian black mana basically can be either 1 black or 2 life. So you can cast these as 4 2 black or 4 1 black and 2 life. They have a 0 loyalty ability, which is you draw a card, lose 1 life, proliferate. You spend your 4 colorless and 2 black if you like. You don't tick them up, you do the 0 option, you get to draw a card, you get to lose life, and you get to proliferate. So it depends what you can proliferate as to how good value that is the first time you do it, but it's a repeatable draw effect, it's a repeatable proliferate effect. You just have to pay 1 life for the fun of doing it. They also have a -2 loyalty ability with target creature becomes a treasure artifact with tap. Sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color, and loses all other card types and abilities. If you can actually target your opponent's commander, you can effectively just turn them into a treasure token, which means that your opponent's going to have to sack it. It will go back to their command zone and they'll have to play it with that 2 extra colorless cost. They won't be very happy with you. It also has -9. If target player has fewer than 9 poison counters, they get a number of poison counters equal to the difference. I've been killed with that effect. It was in standard, and I can't remember how it worked, I'll be honest, but I know it killed me, and I sat there after it killed me and spent ages trying to work it out, and it was to do with a counter doubling card that was also in play at the same time. Another card you might want to consider using in a proliferate deck is Evolution Sage. Evolution Sage is an elf druid. They are 2 colors, 1 green, and they have landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, proliferate. Say you play an Evolving Wilds, for example, you get to proliferate, you crack and sack the Evolving Wilds, get a forest, and you put the forest into play. And when the forest comes into play, you get to proliferate again. Now, there are various options for proliferate commanders that we could use. An interesting one is Xavier Sal, Infested Captain. They are black, green, and blue. They are a legendary creature, human fungus pirate. They have a 3/3 body, and they have two abilities. The first one is tap, remove a counter from another permanent you control. Populate, activate only as a sorcery. And populate creates a token that's a copy of a creature token you control. And they have tap, sacrifice another creature, proliferate, activate only as a sorcery. Choose any number of permanents and or players, then give each another counter of each kind already there. My problem with Xavier Sao is that they are a little bit slow and they don't have, say, flying and vigilance, for example, so you can't attack and then tap them to sacrifice another creature. However, they are in blue, so you can use strategies that will untap them, and so you can retap them, but you can equally only do it during your turn because it can only be activated as a sorcery. There is an alternative to Xavier Sao, which is Kilo Apogee Mind. They are blue, red, white. They are a legendary artifact creature, robot artificer, and they have haste. Whenever Kilo becomes tapped, proliferate. They don't have any kind of evasion, which means if you do attack with them, you are likely to walk straight into a blocker. But they can be tapped the turn they come into play if you wish to do so to proliferate. But they are also a legendary artifact creature, so if you can find some other way being able to tap them because of another card in play, then they become tapped and they can proliferate. These were two options I thought we could consider, but they weren't either of the options I went for. The option I actually went for is Azuri, Stalker of Spheres. I will confess, I really don't like the artwork of this card, but I do like what it does. Azuri, Stalker of Spheres, is two colorless, green-blue. They're a legendary creature, Phyrexian Elf Warrior, and they have, when Azuri, Stalker of Spheres, enters the battlefield, you may pay 3. If you do, proliferate twice. When you proliferate, draw a card. If you pay 5 colorless green-blue when you play Azuri, you get to proliferate twice and draw 2 cards. You also get to draw a card every time you proliferate, which I think is good value. You don't have to attack with Azuri, you don't have to tap Azuri, you just have to use other cards to proliferate. And that's why I chose it. It may be one fewer colour than the other two, but I think in green and in blue, particularly in blue, we have a really useful way we can proliferate, and we have ways in green that we can take advantage of that. As an example, we can play cards like Tekuthao, Inquiry Dominus. They are 2 colourless, 2 blue. They're a legendary creature for Phyrexian Horror, and they have flying. If you would proliferate, proliferate twice instead, which if we link that back to Azuri, that's like if you would proliferate and draw a card, proliferate twice and draw 2 cards instead. They also have 1 and 2 blue Phyrexian mana, which remove 3 counters from among other artifacts, creatures, and planeswalkers you control. Put an indestructible counter on Tekuthao. If we're looking for extra value from that, we could play something like Fathom Mage. Fathom Mage is 2 colorless green blue. They're a creature human wizard. I always thought they were an elf. They are a 1/1 body and they have evolve. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, if that creature has greater power or toughness than this creature, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. And in this sort of deck, when you're looking to proliferate a lot, you're not too worried about the fact that you're not going to evolve Fathom Mage too many times. As long as you evolve them once, that's enough. Fathom Mage also has, whenever a +1/+1 counter is put on Fathom Mage, you may draw a card. So if we proliferate, and Azuri lets us draw a card, and then we put an extra +1/+1 counter on Fathom Mage, we get to draw another card. If we proliferate twice, because we've got Tekuthao in place, we get to draw 2 cards, which means that we have 2 instances where we're putting 2 +1/+1/+1 counters on Fathom Mage, which means we get to draw 2 more cards. So in fact, in total, we're drawing 4 cards. Now, we've talked a lot about Planeswalkers, we've talked about poison counters, we've talked about +1/+1 counters, but those aren't the only types of counters in the game. So I thought I'd go through a few little variations of counters where we can use proliferate to our advantage. And the first 2 examples I've chosen are both focused on mana generation. The first one is Pyramid of the Pantheon. Pyramid of the Pantheon is an artifact, it's 1 colourless, and it has 2 tap. Add 1 mana of any colour to your mana pool. Put a brick counter on Pyramid of the Pantheon. That is not particularly good value. So for a net effect of 2 colourless mana, you get to put a brick counter on Pyramid of the Pantheon. Now, a brick counter is a counter, so proliferate will increase the number of counters. If you can proliferate multiple times, you can get up to the magic 3 brick counters, and then you have tap. Add 3 mana of any one color to your mana pool. So long as we can use proliferate to increase those brick counters, we can get the value out of Pyramid of the Pantheon. But we do have to do that one step at the beginning to get the initial brick counter onto it. Midnight Clock is 2 colorless and blue, and you can tap it for blue mana. You can also pay 2 and 1 blue and put an hour counter on Midnight Clock. And at the beginning of each upkeep, you can put an hour counter on Midnight Clock. And when the 12th hour counter is put on Midnight Clock, you shuffle your hand, graveyard into your library, then draw 7 cards and you exile Midnight Clock. You can use your proliferates and upkeeps to rapidly ramp into those 12-hour counters you need, whereby you can discard whatever cards you've got in your hand into your graveyard, take your graveyard, shuffle it into your library, and then draw 7 new cards. You can see we are using our proliferate to get value, and we don't just have to focus on things like Planeswalkers in order to do so. Another great card, which would work well with EDHREC, is Ominous Seas. Ominous Seas is a 1 colorless blue enchantment that says whenever you draw a card, put a foreshadow counter on Ominous Seas. Still a counter. Remove 8 foreshadow counters from Ominous Seas to create an 8/8 blue Kraken creature token. It also has Cycling 2. I don't think you're going to want to use the Cycling 2 in this particular deck. I think you're going to want to put Ominous Seas onto the battlefield. You'll be drawing cards, you'll be proliferating, you'll be drawing cards, you'll be proliferating. You'll have, before you know it, 8 counters on Ominous Seas, which you can remove to create an 8/8 blue Kraken creature token. The thing about Ominous Seas is it doesn't go away. So if you can do that creature creation step and you have 9 foreshadow counters on Ominous Seas, you can proliferate and put more on there again, and you can repeat that process. Another great proliferate card, although I do confess the mana cost to do it is quite high, is Contagion Engine. We talked a little bit about -1/-1 counters when we looked at infect, but you don't have to have infect and play with poison counters to be able to play with -1/-1 counters. Contagion Engine is a classic of this trope. They are an artifact, they are 6 colorless, and they have when Contagion Engine enters the battlefield, put a -1/-1 counter on each creature target player controls. So if you have an opponent that's got lots of creatures in play, you can play Contagion Engine, you can put -1/-1 counters on each creature they control, you can then proliferate, and that will multiply the number of -1/-1 counters on their creatures until eventually they all die. And no amount of regeneration or indestructible will save them from those -1/-1 counters. Contagion Engine also has 4 tap, proliferate, then proliferate again. If we were to go back to Tekuthal, who says whenever we proliferate an extra time, and we were to do this 4 tap, proliferate, then proliferate again, we would proliferate 4 times. If we had EDHREC in play, we would draw 4 cards, and then we would add 4 extra -1/-1 counters to all of those creatures. So you can see where my thoughts were going with this. On its own, Contagion Engine is 10 mana to put 3 -1/-1 counters on each of your opponent's creatures. Now that may take out a lot of their tokens if they've got lots of tokens in play. It may also not kill those key creatures that you want to get rid of. One thing to note is that -1/-1 counters counter out +1/+1 counters. So if their creature's got a +1/+1 counter on it, and you add a -1/-1 counter on it, they counter each other. Then there's no counters on that creature at all whatsoever. Something to bear in mind. A couple of other cards I thought of, and one that my son plays in his Shalai deck, is Stocking the Pantry. So Stocking the Pantry is just a basic enchantment. It's 1 green. It says whenever you put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on a creature you control, put a supply counter on Stocking the Pantry. And then it's 2 colorless, remove a supply counter for Stocking the Pantry, draw a card. Stocking the Pantry is just a different type of counter, but it's a draw engine. And it's really great in +1/+1 counter decks, because if you are proliferating +1/+1 counters, you are putting supply counters on Stocking the Pantry, and you're proliferating those as well. As long as you've got the spare mana to remove a supply counter from Stocking the Pantry, you can then draw a card. One last card I found whilst I was looking up all these cards, and it's a new card to me, is Loading Zone. So Loading Zone is quite a modern card. It's an enchantment, it's 3 colours, and it's green, and it says if 1 or more counters would be put on a creature, spacecraft, or planet you control, twice that many of each of those kinds of counters are put on it instead. And this is warp, green, you may cast this card from your hand for its walk, cast exile this enchantment at the beginning of the next end step, but then you may cast it from exile on a later turn. So with Loading Zone and Proliferate, I haven't really looked in spacecraft or planets, but if they've got counters, then you can obviously proliferate those counters. But Loading Zone also says if you're putting on counters onto those types of cards, you can put double the amount instead. So instead of 1 in each proliferate step, you would put 2. So I just thought it would give you extra value. And as I say, it was a new card. I'd not seen it before. I thought it was kind of interesting. I now need to go and look into what spacecrafts and planets are out there, but that's for another time. I hope you've enjoyed my little look at how to use Atraxa. Atraxa is the third card clearly because she's just versatile. My choice obviously was Azuri. You could choose something different. If you would choose something different, let me know in the comments. Let me know, tell me why. Don't forget to like and subscribe and join me next time when we look at the fourth most heavily played card on EDHREC.